Hey everyone, Chaps here, and let's dive a bit deeper into the Gears of War board game. In our last video, I discussed how to set up the board. Today, I want to discuss the actual rules of how to play. If you missed the last video, you can find it linked below. But for now, I'll assume that you're all set up and ready to go. Alright, so the board is set up and it's time to play. Let's go over these rules of play. The basics are, a player starts their turn, where they heal and they perform primary and secondary actions. Then, the Locust start their turn. They perform actions based on the AI cards, and then play moves to the next player. You rinse and repeat until either you win the game or you lose. The first thing a player does when they start their turn is they heal by drawing up to 2 order cards. Remember, these cards aren't only for performing actions, but they're also your health. The reason I said up to 2 is because that you can't go over your max health, which for most characters is 6 cards. If you start your turn with 5 cards, you're only going to draw 1 order card. You don't draw 2 and then discard to get back to 6. If this pile is ever depleted, just shuffle the discard pile and start a new order deck. The order cards in your hand are yours to use as you please. You can look at them and you can rearrange them and you can play them in whatever order you want. So once you've healed up and you're ready to perform some actions, what can you do? Well, for starters, you must perform a primary action. This involves discarding 1 order card of your choice. By discarding an order card, you may either A. Move up to 2 areas, B. Perform 1 attack, or C. Resolve the actions listed on the card. Moving is pretty straightforward. Unless otherwise specified, you can move freely around the map space by space. Any broken dirt line counts as a space, and solid black lines and dashed blue lines are impassable for movement. The second option, attacking, we'll hit on more later when we discuss combat, but for now let's focus on option C, which is resolving the actions listed on the order card. An order card may have 1 action, or it may have multiple actions. An action starts with a bullet point. If performing an action on the card, you must perform the full action. If you start an action, you must continue until you either reach the end of the card, or you reach another bullet point. If the card has multiple actions, you may perform any number of them, but they must be done in order. For example, if I perform the sit tight order, I have 2 options. A, I can have someone draw 2 order cards, or B, I can have someone draw 2 order cards, and then I can move 1 Locust 1 area towards me and skip the Locust activation step. I'm not allowed to skip straight to the second bullet point. Basically, you must move in order through the actions on the card, and you can stop whenever you want, as long as it's at a bullet point. On your turn, you may also perform special actions. These are reviving a downed teammate, picking up dropped weapon or ammo, or activating an area's equipment. Note that you can perform each of these actions 1 time per turn, but each time you perform one, it requires you to discard an order card. It should also be noted that these special actions are in addition to your primary action. A turn must have 1 and only 1 primary action, such as movement, attacking, or following the order card, and then these secondary or special actions are just optional add-ons. These can be performed before or after any primary action. That is, before or after moving, before or after attacking, or before or after an action on an order card. If using the assault card, you're not able to move 1 space, revive someone, and then move 2 other spaces. Special actions must be before or after an action, not in the middle of one. You may, however, move up to 3 spaces, revive someone, and then perform 1 attack, as the 2 items on that order card are 2 separate actions. Those are the basics of what a player can do, but once a player has taken their turn, they've done their primary action, and they've optionally done a secondary action, it's time for the Locust activation stage. Note that this is done after each player's turn. This is not one of those games where all players get to go and then the enemy goes. The enemy goes after each player. This phase starts by having the active player, the person who just went, drawing an AI card. These cards work one of 2 ways. Either A, the card just tells you what to do, like this one telling you to discard an ammo token and then remove dropped weapons. Or B, the card has a conditional statement, like, if 1 or more Locust is within 2 movement of you, then do this. Otherwise, do that. Note that some of the cards will prompt you to draw a new AI card. You'll keep drawing AI cards and following the instructions until you're no longer instructed to draw a new one. If the AI card pile is ever depleted, just shuffle the discard pile and start a new AI card deck. Some cards will prompt you to spawn Locust. Locusts spawn from emergence holes, but only the currently open ones. If an emergence hole has been closed, do not spawn Locust at that location. So now we know how the cog can operate and how the Locusts are controlled. But what is our objective? Well, looking back to the reference sheet, we have this mission deck at the top. The top card should have a flip when condition listed at the bottom. Think of this as your goal. When that goal is reached, you immediately flip the card over and read the directions on the back. It's often directing you to move to the next stage. Eventually, when you flip a card, you'll see something stating that you've won the game. Alternatively, if every cog character is bleeding out, then you have lost the game. I'll mention that you may see a lock token on top of the next location. If this is the case, you're not able to move on until you satisfy the criteria to remove the token. It should be pretty obvious when you're following the mission deck. I mentioned earlier that your hand, the order cards that you're holding, not only serve as your ability to perform actions, but are also your health. As soon as you're forced to discard an order card, but you're unable to do so, you're considered DBNO or bleeding out. You can stay standing with 0 cards in your hand, but as soon as you would go negative, you're considered bleeding out. Your character should be laid down on its side on the board to represent this, and when you're in this state, you're very limited in what you may do. You can't attack, you can't heal, and really your only option is to move. You're allowed to move 1 space on your turn, and that's it. Luckily, Locust can't attack you when you're in this state to finish you off. But unfortunately, even when DBNO, you still need to have a Locust activation stage. The only way to recover from this state is to have an ally revive you. Note that when you're revived, you don't receive any order cards, you're just stuck with 0 cards until it's your turn and you're able to heal again. How do we lose these cards though? Well, obviously through playing them on your turn, but also by being dealt damage. Let's take a look at attacks. And I guess to look at attacks, let's bring out an enemy card, a character card, and a weapon card. Let's start with the enemy card here. In the bottom left, we see their defense score. This is exactly the same as what we see on the cog card. Next to that is the enemy's starting health. Cogs don't have that because your health is based on the number of order cards in your hand. Continuing over, we see this symbol. This tells us that the character is not capable of being chainsawed. We may also see this symbol. As we explained in the last video, this identifies them as a character who will take cover if cover is available. And lastly, on the right, we see their attack score. The weapon shown here is irrelevant, it just symbolizes an attack. The human characters don't have this symbol. For the cog, this depends on the weapon being used, so it's represented on these weapon cards. Let's look at the Lancer. Its black box shows either 2 or 4 as an attack score. This depends on ammo tokens. If you decide to spend an ammo token, you may perform an overkill attack and use the right number, in this case a 4. If you elect not to spend a token, your score is only a 2. Note that unless otherwise stated, you cannot attack with a weapon that has no tokens. So if this Lancer had no tokens left, I can't even use the weak attack. It doesn't cost any tokens to attack with it, but being the Lancer doesn't have any tokens available, I still can't attack. On the right side, we see a crosshair with a 2 next to it. That's the weapon's range. Range is determined by a space on the board. The space you're in has 0 range, and each additional space adds 1. So let's do an example attack here and see how this plays out. I'm here, and I want to attack this Locust over here. He's at range 1, which is within my limit of 2. Another requirement is having line of sight, because I clearly can't shoot through walls. You can shoot through the broken dirt lines and the blue dashed lines, but not solid black lines. Line of sight is measured from anywhere in your space to anywhere in their space. The only exception to this is cover, which I'll hit on shortly. Because of this, even if I'm here and the boomer is here, I technically still have line of sight. I'm attacking this boomer who has 2 defense die, and I opt to spend an ammo token, so I get 4 attack die. We roll all 6 of these die, and here's our result. We get 1 blank, 1 single wound, 1 double wound, and 1 omen. He gets 1 double shield and 1 single shield. The first step is always determining what the omen does. Because I'm attacking, I look at my weapon, and for the Lancer, an omen just means it's 1 wound. If the boomer was the one attacking me, I'd need to look at his card and see the effect, and for the boomer, that means dealing extra damage to the people in this space. But for this example, I've now rolled 4 wounds. I've rolled the 3 on the dice plus the 1 from the omen, and the boomer rolled 3 shields. Subtracting those off, we're left with a net 1 wound. If the boomer were attacking me, I would just choose an order card from my hand and I would discard it, symbolizing that I've taken some damage. But I was the one attacking him, so how do we indicate his wounds? Well, we go to our handy stack of wound markers. I take the wound marker with the boomer symbol on it and I place it down under him. According to the marker, he now has 2 health. It doesn't matter how much damage I did to him, all that matters is that I did damage. This can be a bit confusing as not many games work this way. He started with 3 health. If I did 1 damage, he'd get a marker and now has 2 health. If I did 2 damage, he'd get a marker and now has 2 health. So yeah, even if I did 2 damage, it doesn't matter. He's not down to 1 health, he still has 2. And obviously if I did 3 or more damage, then yeah, he'd die. But here he is with 2 health. If we attack again and do 1 damage, nothing happens, he just stays at 2 health. He'll stay at 2 health until either he heals, or we have an attack that does 2 or more damage. If he heals, the wound token is removed, and if he dies, then he's removed from the board and the wound token is flipped over. This one has an X, showing that nothing is dropped, but sometimes a wound token will indicate that they dropped a weapon. If they drop a weapon, then it's treated like equipment on the map. When you're in the space, you may spend a card to pick it up, along with the ammo tokens indicated. If you kill an enemy outright, i.e. never needing the wound markers, don't forget to still flip a marker in case they drop something. We covered the special case in combat with the Omen and the triggered abilities, but there's 3 other main modifiers to combat. First up is range. You can still attack an enemy that is out of range. The defender, however, will get 1 additional defense die for each space outside of your weapon's base range. So if that boomer that I attacked was instead over here, he's now 4 spaces away instead of 1, and my range is only 2, so he'll get 2 additional defense die, bringing it up to 4 total. The second aspect is cover. In the last video, we discussed moving enemies into cover and how to identify it on the map. I'll point out that not only can enemies use it, but so can the COG players. Again, they're on a first-come, first-served basis, and only 1 figure can be in each cover at a time. For Locust, as they spawn or move, use the cover indicator on their card to determine if they go into cover. For a human, when you finish your turn, you can decide if you want to go into cover or not. It's a free action, there's no cards or anything required for this. So how does it affect combat? Well, if you're in cover, you can gain some additional defense die, and it can also affect your line of sight. I mentioned earlier that line of sight is measured from anywhere in your area to anywhere in their area. Well, if you're in cover, line of sight is measured from this little indicator, and that's both from the sending and receiving end. So it helps block some line of sight if defending, but it can limit you when attacking. The biggest thing cover does though is gives the potential for additional defense die. If the attacker and defender are in the same space, there's no change. If cover is hiding you from the attacker, then you get +2 die. And if you're in cover but it's not fully blocking you, then you just get +1 die. I like to think of it in terms of right angles and extended cover. Let's say I'm here. If the guy attacking me is here, then there's no change because he's in my space. If they're over here, clearly they need to shoot past cover in order to get me, so I'll get +2 defense die. If they're over here, then they have a clear shot at me, but I'm in cover, so I still get +1 die. And over here, they still need to shoot over cover, so I get +2 die. Basically, picture it as if your cover extended out across the entire map. If they need to shoot over it in order to hit you, you get +2 die. And if they don't need to shoot over it and they're not in your space, you get +1. Now the third thing that can affect combat are reaction abilities. I was actually surprised at how often these came into play. The COG have terrible defense stats, so these can really come in clutch. At the top of each order card, you'll see one of 3 symbols. By discarding this card, you're able to perform the action corresponding to that symbol. The simplest one is dodge. When an enemy is attacking you, you may discard this card in order to gain 2 defense die. This must be done before the attack is rolled, and you cannot stack these, like you can't play 2 dodge cards in order to get +4. Next is guard. This one is limited in the fact that it can only be played once per Locust activation stage. Not once per player, but once collectively per stage. A player can discard a guard card at any time during the stage in order to attack a Locust that is either moving or attacking. You can attack with any weapon, except for frag grenades, and you may opt to use an ammo token if you wish. Being you're so weak, having the opportunity to kill a Locust before they attack you is extremely helpful. Unfortunately, like I said, it's limited on how often it can be used. The last reaction is follow. Unlike the others, this is used when it's another player's turn. If they start in your space or they pass through their space while they're moving, you may discard a follow card in order to follow them. Whichever space they end up in, you'll be placed in as well. You cannot detach and stop prematurely, so wherever they end their turn, you'll end up there as well. I'd say this is the least used, but when it is used, it's very useful. And that really covers most of the basics of how to play. It takes a little bit of getting used to, and there's a few rules that may seem unclear. In general though, if something is unclear, the benefit of the doubt is given to the player. You can always go online and look stuff up as well. In summary, a player starts their turn by healing. They then must perform a primary action by discarding an order card. Secondary actions may be performed if they wish, and then Locust AI cards are drawn to determine Locust actions. The player's objective is listed on the mission card, and the players lose if everyone is bleeding out. When attacking, you ensure that there's range and line of sight, and you account for any special cover conditions. Roll the appropriate number of dice, and if omens are rolled, account for their effect and determine the number of wounds to be dealt. Rinse, repeat, and enjoy. Those are the standard rules, but as with most games, people love to come up with some house rules. Here's a few of my favorites that I've seen posted online. Some of them have to do with canon and game knowledge, and a lot are actually due to the difficulty. This is one of the most difficult co-op board games I've played, well, at least with 4 players. Difficulty scales up really quickly as you add players. One of the main difficulties is around how often you draw order cards and how many attacks there are. Especially in 4-player games, there can be a ton of attacks against you with no time to heal. A solution is to limit the number of attacks and number of AI cards drawn. I prefer the option of limiting the number of AI cards. Like in a 4-player game, you could max at 2 cards, a 3-player game maxes at 3 cards, and a 2-player game maxes at 4 cards. This doesn't count when the cards have nothing happening. Basically, it saves you from having a very unlucky shuffle in your deck. Changing initial enemy spawns is another option. If you're struggling with a 4-player game, I'd suggest using the 3-player initial spawns. This will just reduce the initial batch of enemies a bit, but it won't hinder them later in the game. Ammo can be fairly scarce in this game. A crutch you could have is to increase the ammo drops. For an enemy wielding a weapon, if you kill them, they either drop a weapon or nothing. An option would be to modify things if no weapon is dropped. So if you get the X and they don't drop a weapon, you could play where they drop an ammo token to be used on any weapon once you pick it up. This makes things a bit easier, but it just makes more sense in relation to the OG games. On that note, let's talk about revives. You spend a card as a secondary action to revive a teammate. That makes sense, as you're risking yourself a bit. Unfortunately, that player now has 0 health, and enemies will still have at least 1 or up to 3 rounds to attack that player before they have a chance to heal. So how do we fix this? Option A is for the healer to give that discarded card to the downed player rather than discarding it. And option B is for the healer to still discard the card, but now the downed player draws a new order card. Options C and D are basically the same as A and B, but it allows you to discard up to 2 cards instead of just 1. It's basically a higher risk, higher reward system. Now for the last of the main house rules that I consider is dealing with closing E-holes. When you're right over top of one, there's no reason to roll to close an E-hole, and there's no reason to roll for damage. So this rule proposes this. If you're in a space with an E-hole, you can either play as normal, aka rolling to close and dealing damage, or you can just drop the frag into the hole, aka no roll is needed, nobody is damaged, but you still close the E-hole, and yeah, it still costs a grenade token. For some other house rules, you can check out the Board Game Geeks that I've got linked down below. As you may have noticed from these rules, the game is rather hard. I don't always use all of these house rules, but it can be nice to mix and match occasionally. Sadly, this game is no longer in production, and your only real chances of getting it are through secondhand means like eBay. You'll often see it listed for around $200, but you can occasionally find it for closer to $60. Alternatively, you can find user-created mods on things like Tabletop Simulator. It's sort of a pain to set things up on Tabletop Sim, especially compared to the physical version, but hey, at least it's an option. If you found this helpful, go ahead and drop it a like. And if you think you'll enjoy this game, go ahead and subscribe here or to our main channel. We may try and get a playthrough of this posted up there in the near future. If you have any questions, hit me up on Twitter or comment down below. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll catch you next time.